Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Morad, and I'm here with Francisco, Isabella, and Ashanti, and we'll be presenting the use of artificial intelligence in predictive policing. Our project explores how AI tools are used by law enforcement to forecast where and by whom crime occurs, and how these systems can unintentionally reinforce systematic racism through the data they rely on. So, overview is just looking at how predictive policing is essentially the use of analytical algorithms to forecast potential criminal activity. In other words, trying to predict where or by whom crimes might occur. There are three main types of predictive policing. The first is place-based, which is focuses on identifying crime hotspots. The second is person-based, which assigns scores to individuals based on arrest or association data. And the third is group-based, which looks at patterns within social or demographic groups. The challenges is that all of these systems depend heavily on historical police data. That data often reflects years of bias enforcement practices, meaning the models trained on it can reproduce the same racial disparities that already exist. Instead of preventing crime, predictive policing can end up reinforcing over policing in minority and immigrant neighborhoods. This issue becomes even more concerning when we look at who control these algorithms. Private firms and not public agencies often design and manage them, which uh, leaves very little transparency or oversight. At the same time, anti-immigrant rhetoric and AI-powered enforcement under agencies like DHS and ICE have accelerated surveillance efforts, especially targeting immigrant communities. Today, around 51.9 million immigrants live in the United States, making up nearly one-fifth of the labor force. That statistic shows how widespread the reach of these technologies can be, and how biases in policing and immigration enforcement data have real social and economic consequences. Ultimately, predictive policing isn't just about technology; it's about who creates it, who controls it, and who it impacts the most. And our first visual is the iceberg model. So it helps illustrate the deeper layers of predictive policing beyond what we see on the surface. At the top, which is the visible layer, are events like Palantir developing software for ICE to monitor immigrants, predictive policing models being rolled out in major cities, and surveillance technologies like Stingray devices that track phones. These are the things we hear about in the news or see discussed publicly. Um, but just below that surface are the patterns of behavior driving those events, things like growing reliance on AI and law enforcement targeting of racial minorities and the lack of transparency in how these systems are built or tested. We also see repeated civil rights concerns appear in report after report, showing that bias isn't just occasional, but it's systematic. And going deeper than that, we find the systematic structures that make this all possible. Partnerships between government and tech companies, profit incentives that reward surveillance technology, and weak AI ethics and privacy protections. These structural issues are what keep bias systems running, even when the technology is proven flawed. Finally, at the very bottom of the iceberg are the mental models, the beliefs that technology is neutral, that more surveillance automatically means more safety, and that predictive analytics are always accurate. These underlying assumptions shape how society views AI policing, and they are the hardest to challenge because they feel objective or data driven.
So our root cause diagram shows how different factors are connected in shaping AI-based predictive policing. It starts with racially biased data that feeds algorithms, causing them to reproduce existing racial inequalities. Social factors like systemic racism and fear-based narratives keep public and institutional support for these systems strong. There are also barriers such as language obstacles and limited legal representation that make it hard for affected individuals to challenge these practices. Policy factors also have a significant role as they determine how predictive policing technologies are regulated, deployed, and audited. Altogether, these factors lead to serious effects: the disproportionate targeting of minority communities, loss of trust in law enforcement, and broader economic and social consequences for families and the national workforce. During our research of the role that algorithms play in predictive policing, we interviewed two people. Vihan Patel, a machine learning engineer at Moad AI, discussed that algorithmic models tend to mirror the biases embedded in their training data. Quote, if training labels come from past human decisions, the model learns those decisions rather than ground truth. Quote. In predictive policing, this means algorithms often reproduce patterns of discriminatory enforcement present in historical arrests and patrol records. Patel added that multilingual text introduces additional challenges, as translation and entity extraction tools frequently misinterpret slang, idioms, or code switching. errors that can distort information from speakers of non-standard English or other languages. Our second interview was with Jordan Ziskin, the manager of people operations at KIPP New York City. He discussed the concept of fuzzy matching, which is a process where AI searches for approximate rather than exact matches within a system. Similar principles are used in facial recognition technologies, where algorithms compare facial features to identify individuals. However, research from 2018 found that some of these systems misidentify people of color at disproportionately high rates due to limited diversity in their training data. These inaccuracies can have serious implications, leading to unwarranted searches, arrests, and other police actions. Ultimately, they pose significant threats to civil liberties, including freedom of assembly, expression, and religion, as well as protection from discrimination.
Thank you very much. And so, from that interview data and for our initial analysis, we were able to identify who are the primary stakeholders that are dealing with predictive policing and within the development of algorithms. And as such, understanding how historical policing records, social media data, facial recognition, and demographic information that are fed into these algorithms are all correlated between location, identity, and risk. So as we talked previously about, algorithms usually predict hotspots or high risk individuals. And so all of those systems are fully supported by law enforcement and civil rights agencies, AI developers and data scientists, but also we can't forget the role of policymakers, legislators, and academic researchers. So here we have our cluster map that divides the primary systems that are involved within the process of how predictive policing is heavily presented with systemic racism, and that we have factors related to how racial minorities are treated, how immigrants are treated within the United States, and how that is very heavily related to how prison systems treats the data from the collection of evidence that they already have for their algorithms that is also already biased data for the way that it was collected. And so we can see predictive policing without considering the three primary aspects of systemic racism that is heavily collected with the collection of evidence that feeds into the prison system and is therefore related to how it is finally leading to arrests or violence or forms of abuse against racial minorities. And so here we try to identify within these three primary systems who were the stakeholders that we could think of possible solutions to help us address systemic racism and predictive policing. So within data evidence, we have academia and the media who are responsible for both formally and informally gathering data on previous crime reports. We have the prison system that is heavily influenced by government action and the US Department of Justice. And it also is related to ICE, which you know has been doing a lot of actions related to the coercion of immigrant communities. We also have systemic racism as it relates to racial minorities, both as the way that they are treated by larger society as a whole, but also how their data is interpreted by algorithms. And all of that is fed into the resources software developers have when they develop AI tools.
Thank you, Isa. So previous slides touched on some of the root causes, but just as a quick overview, some challenges with the use of AI and predictive policing is that algorithms are trained on biased data, reinforcing discriminatory patterns against racial minorities, pre-existing systemic and inequalities embedded in data sets, and disproportionately target racial minorities. Law enforcement reliance on AI, questioning how accurate the given information is, potential for civil rights and due process violations due to failure to fact check information, not including minorities in the design, evaluation of predictive policing. Well, based on these challenges, some potential solutions the group came up with is data set audits to identify possible source bias, including community oversight boards. To review these policing tools and defining needed evidence for predictive policing, requiring law enforcement training on AI ethics, establishing accountability framework, update policing different civil rights protections with the challenges being faced by AI, requiring more community stakeholder participation in the creation of these policing strategies to help bias. So we came up with these solutions because we realized that there was a gap in how things are currently measured, managed. So some of the gaps that we found was the transparency and the position of training data sets. Few safeguards currently exist in prevention of racial bias, racial-based bias, providing training for law enforcement personnel and implementations. There was currently not many training on that. The legal framework is not caught up to the technological advancements and minimal participation from our groups in the development of these AI-based policing strategies.
So, in conclusion, AI systems trained on biased data sets reinforce systemic discrimination. Addressing bias requires a system thinking approach that examines how data, institutions, and historical inequalities interact. Accountability, transparent, and diverse representation of AI development are key in the creation and creating fairer policing technologies.